I made her tea first. 7 years of marriage, and that habit never changed. Her cup, then mine, in that order, without thinking, the way your hands learn a thing so completely that your brain stops taking credit for it. That morning I stood at the counter and watched the water come to a boil, and I caught myself mid-reach for her mug and just stopped, held both cups, set hers down on the counter by the window, and watched the steam curl upward and disappear, like it was trying to leave the room before I did. I didn't pour it out. I'm not sure I could have. Maybe I needed to watch something go cold that used to be warm. Maybe I just wasn't ready yet to stop being the man who made her tea. That was the morning everything changed. My name is Mason Anderson. I was 34 years old. I have a face my mother called handsome and a mind my late grandfather called dangerous, the kind that sees the whole board while everyone else is looking at one square. I had spent the better part of 7 years pointing that mind at someone else's dreams and calling it love. I wrote code for a living, not flashy work, the kind that held everything together behind the wall, invisible until it failed. I built systems that made other people's businesses run clean. And in my own time, in the margins of a marriage that had slowly stopped seeing me, I was building something else entirely. Vanessa didn't know about that yet. That was the problem, according to her, that I was going nowhere, that I wasn't moving fast enough, that the man she had married had made peace with a ceiling she refused to live beneath. Let me back up and show you how we got here. Vanessa Anderson, born Vanessa Marie Carter, was the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately sorted everyone in it into two categories: useful and not. I didn't see that for a long time. When you love someone deeply, you translate their ambition as drive, their coldness as strength, their impatience as vision. You give everything generous names. You call it beautiful. I called it beautiful for 7 years, the same way you call a slow leak in the ceiling interesting right up until the floor gives out. We met at a company networking event on a Thursday evening in October. She was in brand strategy, polished and sharp, the kind of woman who made direct eye contact when she shook your hand and held it 2 seconds longer than necessary, so you remembered. She spoke in complete sentences at parties and made you feel like every word you said was exactly what she needed to hear. I fell completely, not just for her, but for the version of myself I became when she was looking at me like I was worth looking at. 2 years of dating, a proposal I'd spent 8 months saving for, a wedding where both our mothers cried equal tears, and I genuinely believed I had built something that would outlast both of us. Somewhere in year 3, the air changed in a way I couldn't quite name. Vanessa was promoted twice inside 1 year and moved into an office with a view and a title that came with a different social world. I was proud of her. I told her so, specifically and sincerely, the way a man tells a woman when he means every syllable. But she wanted a different kind of pride from me. She wanted me to be impressive in the rooms she now occupied. She wanted me to arrive somewhere that matched where she was going. I was a developer. I wrote code. I solved the kind of problems nobody noticed unless they went wrong. That wasn't the story she wanted to be standing inside. The first time she said it out loud, we were at a restaurant she'd chosen because someone from her new office had posted about it. We were halfway through dinner when she set her fork down and looked at me with the patient expression of a woman delivering a diagnosis she'd been sitting with for a while. "You're comfortable," she said. "Not angry. Certain. You've made peace with comfortable, Mason, and I genuinely don't know if I have." I set my own fork down. "Being comfortable isn't a failure, Vanessa." She looked at me the way you look at someone who has just walked into a glass door. Like the embarrassment is more painful to witness than the impact was. I picked my fork back up. I finished my dinner. I told myself it was the new job, the new pressure, the new circle she was running in. The human mind is a generous editor when love is doing the publishing. I gave it every excuse I had, and I kept building, quietly, in the background of a marriage that had started measuring me against a ruler I never agreed to be judged by. Then came the Thursday that made all that patience irrelevant. I came home early. A meeting canceled, an afternoon freed up, a small gift of unexpected time. I had planned to sit with the codebase I'd been wrestling all week. I was 2 steps inside the front door, keys still in my hand, when I heard Vanessa's voice from the kitchen. Clear, comfortable, the relaxed tone of a woman who believed she was alone. I stopped moving. "No, he doesn't know," she said. A small laugh, light and unbothered. "And honestly, Renee, I don't even know why I've stayed this long. He is going nowhere. You know what he actually is? He's a nice guy, and nice guys are just a waste of time you can't get back. My hand was still on the front door handle. The words didn't land all at once. They came in one at a time, slow, the way something heavy falls down a long staircase. Each step a separate sound before the thing finally settles at the bottom. A waste of time. I set my keys down on the entry table without making a sound. I turned around. I walked back out the door the same way I had come in, quiet and even, and I sat in my car at the end of our street, and I stayed there for a long time. Both hands on the steering wheel. Radio off. The afternoon light doing something ordinary on the houses around me, like the world had not just shifted on its axis while I was standing in my own hallway. I didn't cry. I want to say that with some precision, because it wasn't strength. Not yet. It was the particular stillness of a man whose mind has just been given something enormous to process and has politely asked the rest of him to wait. I drove. Not home. Not anywhere I could name. I drove until the city thinned and I was on the highway with open road ahead of me and a sky going orange and wide at the edges. I drove past the exit I should have taken and kept going for another 20 minutes. Then I pulled to the shoulder and I sat there in the quiet hum of stopped traffic and I thought about the project on my laptop at home. The one she didn't know existed. The one I had been building for 22 months in the margins of a marriage that had stopped asking what I was doing with my time. I thought about it for a long while. Then I turned around and I drove home. I walked in the front door at 6:47 in the evening. Vanessa was at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and her laptop open, coat draped over the chair beside her, still in her work shoes. She looked up when she heard me come in. "Hey," she said. She smiled the automatic smile, the one that lived in muscle memory long after the warmth behind it had gone somewhere else. "You're home early. Meeting's wrapped up," I said. She nodded and looked back at her screen. I went to the kitchen. I made dinner. I set the table. I asked how her day was, and she told me in the summary version she'd been giving me for the past 2 years, not dishonest, just edited. We ate. We said goodnight. She fell asleep beside me with the uncomplicated breathing of a woman who had nothing pressing on her conscience. I lay in the dark and I listened to her breathe, and I thought about every year I had given this woman. Not given up. Given. Deliberately, lovingly, with both hands open. Every late night I hadn't complained about. Every dinner party full of people who looked past my shoulder. Every time I had put her career above my building because someone had to be patient, and I was the one who had always known how. I thought about the project, about what it was becoming. I gave myself exactly until she fell asleep. Then I slipped out of bed, padded down the hall, sat down in the home office, opened my laptop, and I got back to work. Not out of anger. Anger is loud and wastes energy. Out of something colder and cleaner than anger. Out of the particular clarity that comes to a man when the last thing he was still uncertain about has just been settled for him. I worked until 3:14 in the morning. The apartment was quiet around me. The city outside the window was quiet too. And somewhere in that silence, between one line of code and the next, I made myself a promise. She would know the name of what she walked away from. Not because I needed her to, but because some things deserve to be seen. There is a kind of focus that comes to a man when something breaks clean inside him. Not the scattered, desperate energy of grief. The other kind. The cold, organized kind that clears the room of everything unnecessary and leaves only the work. I had that kind of focus in full from the morning after I heard her on the phone. Let me tell you what I had already built before she ever called me a waste of her time. My grandfather had a saying he pulled out on Sunday mornings while he was shining his church shoes. He would look up from the chair by the window and say, "Mason, the mule that's too busy complaining about the load never notices how far it's carried it." I was 12 the first time I heard it, and I didn't fully understand it. By 32, sitting in our home office at midnight writing code, while Vanessa attended events that didn't want me, I understood it completely. Anderson Bridge Technologies. That was the name. It had been in the founding documents for 22 months. A logistics and supply chain management platform built specifically for small and mid-sized Black-owned businesses that were being outcompeted not because their operations were weak, but because the tools available to them were built for someone else. I had watched my Uncle Lucas's shipping company in Memphis spend a decade fighting for ground that bigger firms took without effort. Not because Lucas wasn't sharp, not because his operation wasn't solid, but because the infrastructure the big firms had access to simply did not come in his size. I had built him a door, not just for him, for every business like his. I had done it in the margins of a marriage. Early mornings before Vanessa woke up. Late nights after she went to bed. Saturday afternoons when she went to brunches with women who referred to their husbands' ambitions as situations. I had a co-founder, my oldest friend Damon Reeves, a man who had walked away from a six-figure consulting job 18 months earlier because I had shown him the full picture and he had said, without hesitation, "When do we start?" I had two early investors, small, patient, with the particular confidence of people who bet on foundations rather than headlines. I had something that was already real before anyone outside our small circle knew it existed. I had just never told Vanessa how real it was. Not because I was hiding it, because every time I'd started to bring it up, her face did something when I said the word startup. A particular shift. Not mean, not obvious, just a very small closing, like a window being lowered before rain. She would nod and say something reasonable like, "That's exciting, just be careful." And I would feel the conversation shrink in a way that made me fold it back up and put it away. She hadn't asked enough questions to earn the full picture. That Thursday evening, I understood that was intentional. I opened my laptop at 11:46 p.m. the night after the phone call, and I worked until the sky outside the window started going gray at the edges. Not out of rage. Out of the focused energy of a man who has stopped explaining himself to someone who wasn't listening and decided to let the work do the talking. I was done with low volume. 3 days later, I sat across from Damon at his kitchen table with 2 coffees going cold between us, and I told him exactly what I'd heard. Not the dramatic version, just the facts, plain and in order, the way I always brought Damon things that mattered. He listened the whole way through without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me. "How long have you known it was heading this direction?" he said. I thought about it honestly. Longer than I was willing to say out loud. He nodded once, slow. "All right." He picked up his coffee, even though it had gone cold. "Then let's stop building like men with something to prove and start building like men with somewhere to go." That was the entire conversation. I drove home that evening feeling something I hadn't felt in longer than I wanted to measure. Not happy, not relieved. Pointed. Like a man who has finally remembered which direction he was already walking in. In week 4 of what Damon and I had started calling our acceleration phase, she arrived. Her name was Celeste Watkins. Damon had brought her in as a UX consultant to review our user interface and give us an honest assessment. She showed up at the co-working space on a Tuesday morning with a laptop bag over one shoulder, a coffee she had clearly made herself at home and brought in a travel mug, and the general energy of a woman who had made peace with the fact that she was the most prepared person in most rooms she entered. She sat down across the table from me, opened her laptop, and said without any preamble, "Your user interface wants to be honest, but your navigation is actively lying to your users. Would you like me to show you exactly where?" I said yes. She spent 3 hours walking Damon and me through a complete redesign approach that was so precise and so clear that I immediately wanted to know where she had been for the previous 22 months of development. She didn't soften anything. She didn't compliment us before she corrected us. She pointed, she explained, and when we pushed back on one section, she simply said, "Try it the way I'm describing and then tell me I'm wrong," with the calm certainty of someone who already knew the outcome. She left at 6:30 that evening, and Damon raised one eyebrow at me from across the table. Just the one. It was a very specific eyebrow, one that I had been on the receiving end of since we were 19 years old, and it communicated an entire paragraph without using a single word. "Don't," I said. He raised it higher. "Damon." He took a long, deliberate drink of his water. Set the bottle down. "I didn't say anything, Mason. You were about to." "I was going to say," he said, putting the cap back on slowly, "that she fixed the navigation in 3 hours that we've been arguing about for 4 months. He picked up his bag. That's all I was going to say. He left. I sat alone in the co-working space for a few minutes after he was gone. The room was quiet, the overhead lights starting their automatic dim. I thought about Celeste's directness, about the way she had looked at our work with no interest in making us feel good, only in making the work better. I thought about how long it had been since I had been in a room with someone who simply told the truth about what they saw. Then I put that thought somewhere appropriate and drove home. Vanessa was in the living room, shoes off, coat still on, scrolling her phone with the distant expression of a woman whose thoughts were in a different building. She glanced up when I came in. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge," she said. I went to the kitchen. I ate standing at the counter. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it had been quiet for the past year. Not peaceful, just absent. Like two people had stopped filling the space between them, and neither one had said anything about the gap. I thought briefly about Celeste. Her travel mug. The way she said, "Try it the way I'm describing." I put that thought away. I had a marriage to be honest about first. She came home on a Friday evening with her decision already made. I know that clearly now. I can see it in the specific shape of how that evening moved. The way she set her keys down with both hands. The way she'd chosen the chair across from the couch instead of the couch itself, placing a coffee table between us like a desk between a manager and an employee. The way she had her coat buttoned all the way up, like a woman who did not intend to stay long. I was on the couch with my laptop, buried in a section of the code base that had been pushing back all week. I closed it when I heard her keys. She stood in the middle of the living room for a moment and looked at me with the composed expression of someone who has rehearsed the first sentence enough times that the rest of them will follow without effort. "Mason," she said, "we need to talk." I set the laptop on the cushion beside me. I gave her my full attention. She sat. She said she'd been doing a lot of reflecting. She said she loved me, present tense, placed at the front of the sentence the way a disclaimer sits before fine print. She said the marriage had changed, that they had grown in different directions, that she had tried to be patient, genuinely tried, and that the trying had cost her more than she had left to give. She said she needed someone who matched her energy. That phrase landed flat and deliberate, like a stone placed rather than thrown. She said she had been honest with herself, finally, about what this marriage was and wasn't. Then she looked at me with the careful steadiness of a woman delivering the last line of a prepared statement. "Mason, I love you. But you have been a waste of my time. Not the marriage. Not the years. Me." My hands rested loose on my knees. I didn't move them. I looked at her for a long moment. Not with anger. Not with the particular begging expression she may have been bracing herself for. I looked at her the way you look at something you are trying to memorize, because you know you are seeing it for the last time as what it was. "Is there someone else?" I asked. Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt. Something more like recalculation. "That's not what this is about." "You didn't answer," I said. She pressed her lips together and looked briefly at the window. "I've met someone whose life is moving in the direction I need to be moving in." She looked back at me. "That's all. That's all." 7 years. 2 miscarriages we had never fully talked about. The second one in a hospital waiting room where I had held her hand for 4 hours, and she had never once said thank you. Not because she was cruel, but because grief had made her unreachable in ways I kept trying to reach past. Late nights, canceled plans, a dream I had pressed into the back of my own closet while I showed up at dinners where no one asked what I did, and she never volunteered it. All of it compressed into "that's all" by a woman with her coat still buttoned and both hands folded in her lap, like she was at a business meeting. "Okay, Vanessa," I said. 2 words. Level and clean, like a surface that has been cleared completely. She blinked. I could see the script in her eyes losing its next page. She had prepared for defense. She had prepared for grief. She had prepared for the particular bargaining that a man does when he's been caught off guard and hasn't yet understood the leverage he doesn't have. She had not prepared for stillness. Stillness confused her because she had no countermove for it. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and I poured myself a glass of water and I drank it at the counter in the quiet. I heard her shift in the chair, heard her pick up her phone, heard the particular silence of a woman who came to deliver something and is now not sure what to do with the room she's standing in. That evening, after she had gone to bed in the guest room with the deliberate logistics of a woman already half moved out, I called Damon from the kitchen. I told him everything. The chair, the coat, the phrase "that's all." I said it plainly, in order, without decoration. He was quiet for a moment on the other end. Then he said, "Are you okay?" I thought about it. Not the automatic version of okay, the real question. "I'm clear," I said. "I don't think I've been this clear in a long time." A pause. "Then we move," he said. "We move," I said. I hung up. I went to the home office. I opened my laptop, pulled up the company formation documents, and I spent 3 hours updating the ownership structure, the timeline, the investor notes, every piece of paperwork that told the story of what was already built. I labeled each folder. I organized everything with the particular neatness of a man making sure that when the time came, not a single page would be missing. When I finally closed the laptop, the sky outside the window was beginning to lighten. I went to the kitchen. I made 1 cup of coffee. Just one. The habit of the second mug tried to rise up from somewhere in my muscle memory, and I let it pass. I sat at the kitchen table and I drank my coffee alone in the early quiet, and for the first time in longer than I could honestly measure, the silence in that apartment felt like mine. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers came. Her attorney was efficient and clean. The joint savings split evenly, the lease bought out. She listed everything in organized columns like a woman who had been building the spreadsheet in her head for a while. My attorney was a methodical man named Gerald Hall who had the particular stillness of someone who had sat across enough tables to know when to wait and when to move. He asked me one question. Is there anything she doesn't know about that she'd have interest in claiming? There is, I said, but it's mine alone. Started with my money, documented from the first day, and it predates any argument she could make. Gerald looked at me for a moment over the rim of his glasses. You kept records. From day one, I said. He sat back in his chair with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose job just got significantly easier. Then sign what's fair and let her go, son. I signed what was fair. I didn't reach for more than I was owed. I didn't fight the things that didn't matter. Because I knew, with a precision she had no access to, exactly what she was leaving behind. And I knew she would find out eventually. I was going to let the work tell her. The apartment felt different the first morning I woke up in it alone. Not empty. I want to be exact about that because empty suggests absence, and absence has a kind of sadness to it. What that apartment felt like that first morning was released. Like a held breath, finally, completely let go. I made 1 cup of coffee, set it on the counter by the east window. The morning light came in sideways, the way it always had, and landed across the counter in a long, warm stripe. I had never noticed how good that light was before. I had always been reaching past it toward something else. I sat with the coffee, and I let the quiet be quiet. Damon showed up at 8 with breakfast from the spot 2 blocks over that we'd been going to since graduate school. The one with the booths that were too small, and the coffee that was too strong, and the egg sandwiches that were exactly right. He sat at my kitchen table and unwrapped his food with the comfortable ease of a man who was here simply because he was here, not because he needed to perform concern. We talked about the platform, about the next milestone, about a call with a potential enterprise client in Charlotte who had heard about us through a mutual connection and wanted a demonstration. We didn't talk about Vanessa. That was the gift of Damon Reeves, polished over 2 decades of friendship. He knew exactly which silences to leave alone. I found a new apartment 10 days after Vanessa and I officially separated. A clean 2-bedroom in a quieter part of the city, 4th floor, east-facing windows that caught the morning light and held it. I moved in with 4 boxes and my laptop and my grandfather's old chess set that Vanessa had never once asked about in 7 years. I set the chess set on the shelf above my desk. It looked right there in a way it never had in our apartment. 3 days into the new place, I came home from a 14-hour work session to find something on my doorstep. A ceramic dish, covered with foil, still warm underneath. A note attached in handwriting I recognized from the co-working space whiteboard, where Celeste had been sketching wireframes for our navigation redesign the previous Tuesday. The note said, "You look like a man who hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days." I'm guessing I'm right. Don't confirm it because I already know. Celeste. I stood in my doorway with the dish in both hands for a moment longer than made sense. She was right. I had not eaten a real meal in 3 days. I texted her, "You were right. Thank you." Her reply came back 11 minutes later. "Don't thank me. Fix the navigation before our next session and we'll call it even." I laughed. Standing alone in my hallway in a new apartment with a warm dish in my hands and a message on my phone, I laughed the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere low and genuine, the kind that doesn't ask your permission before it arrives. It surprised me. I hadn't heard that sound come out of myself in longer than I could say. I ate every bite of what she made. I don't know what she put in it, but it tasted like being seen by someone who wasn't keeping score. I had forgotten what that felt like. Now let me tell you what the next 8 months looked like from the outside, because the outside view and the inside reality were 2 entirely different stories. From the outside, a recently divorced man who went to work, came home, worked some more, and appeared to be doing the quiet, unremarkable work of rebuilding a life after a marriage ended. From the inside, Anderson Bridge Technologies closed its series of funding round for $1,200,000. The meeting happened on a Tuesday afternoon on the 42nd floor of a building downtown, a glass-walled conference room with a view of the city that made everything below it look organized. There were 5 people on the other side of that table, and they had reviewed our deck 3 times and asked hard questions across 2 previous calls, and today they were ready to say yes. I watched the lead investor, a compact man named Franklin Wilson who had built and exited 2 companies before he was 40, slide the term sheet across the table. He had a way of doing it without ceremony, like he'd slid term sheets across many tables, and this one was no different except to us. Damon and I signed. The handshakes were firm. The conversation was short. There was no celebration in the room, just the particular clarity of people who have completed a serious thing together and respect the weight of it. On the drive back, Damon drove, and I watched the city out the passenger window. We were on the bridge when I said, "You know what's strange?" "What?" he said. I kept thinking about what this moment would have looked like if things had gone differently. If she'd known. If she'd been there. Damon was quiet for a long beat. 2, 3. Then he said, "She would have wanted a seat at the table and a credit in the story." He said it without malice. He said it as a man who had watched Vanessa Anderson move through rooms for 7 years and knew exactly how she occupied them. I turned back to the window. "Yeah," I said. We drove the rest of the bridge in silence. Below us the water was dark and wide. That evening, I went to the co-working space to finish a documentation update that had been sitting open on my desktop. Celeste was at the far table, earphones in, bent over a wire frame with the focused lean of a woman who gave everything the same level of complete attention. The overhead lights were at their evening setting, lower and warmer, and the space was mostly empty. I sat down at my usual table and said, loud enough to reach her, "We closed the Series A." She pulled one earphone out slowly. "Closed what?" "Series A. For $1,200,000. She held her earphone in her hand and looked at me for a moment. Then she closed her laptop with both hands, the deliberate kind of close, the one that means she was setting everything else aside. She reached across the table and extended her hand. I leaned forward and shook it. Her grip was firm and direct. Her eyes were steady. She didn't say congratulations, didn't make an expression that required me to manage her reaction. She just shook my hand with the full weight of someone who understood exactly what that number meant and respected it without performing the respect. Then she opened her laptop. "Now," she said, sliding her earphone back in, "let's make sure you don't spend any of it on a navigation system that still confuses people who've been using it for a week." I sat back in my chair and I looked at her. She was already back in her wireframe, head down, pencil moving. The warm overhead light was landing across the table between us. Something that had been slowly and carefully building in me for weeks settled into a new position. Not a decision. An arrival. The quiet kind that doesn't need an announcement. I got back to work. I want to be careful with this part of the story, because what happened between Celeste and me was not a rebound, and it was not a counter-argument to Vanessa. It was not a man making himself feel better about being left. I had watched enough people make that mistake to know the shape of it, how it moves, how it looks from the outside. I was not going to do that to her, or to myself. What I'm going to tell you is what it actually was. Celeste Watkins was 31 years old, independent by design, precise by nature, and completely uninterested in pretending to be anything other than exactly what she was. She had left a senior UX role at a well-regarded design firm 18 months earlier because the firm wanted her to make work that was impressive rather than work that was good, and she had decided those were 2 different things she was no longer willing to confuse. She operated with a consistency I found remarkable. She was the same person at a client presentation as she was eating leftover sesame noodles at a cluttered work table at 9 in the evening. The same voice, the same level of attention, the same zero interest in performing warmth she didn't feel or withholding it when she did. In the period of my life that immediately followed 7 years of living beside a woman who was always performing something for someone, that consistency was not just refreshing. It was clarifying in a way I hadn't expected. After the Series A closed, Damon gave us 2 days off, which was his version of a celebration. I spent both days sleeping, genuinely sleeping, for the first time in what felt like months. On the second evening, I walked to the Thai place near the co-working space alone, got a table by the window, and ordered too much food. I was halfway through the second dish when my phone lit up with a message. "Celeste, you didn't work today." Are you sick? Me. Damon gave us 2 days. Celeste, and you're spending them alone in a restaurant. I can see you from the sidewalk. I looked up. She was outside the window, coat on, hands in her pockets, looking at me with that direct expression that somehow managed to be both amused and genuinely concerned at the same time. I lifted my hand. She came inside. She sat down across from me and looked at the amount of food on the table. You ordered for 6, she said. I was hungry. You were lonely, she said. Not unkindly, just accurately. I didn't argue with it because she was right, and she would have known immediately if I tried. She ordered jasmine tea and ate some of my noodles without asking, which I found I didn't mind at all, and we talked for 2 hours. Not about the platform. About her grandmother in Atlanta who had called her every Sunday morning from the same yellow phone in her kitchen for 20 years until she couldn't anymore. About my grandfather and the chest set on my shelf and the shoe shining Sunday mornings. About the difference between building something sustainable and building something that looks good in a press release, and how most people spend entire careers confusing the two. At some point, the restaurant emptied around us, and someone came to reset the table next to ours, and we didn't notice. On the walk back, she had her hands in her coat pockets, and the night was cold and clear, and the sidewalk was quiet enough to hear our own footsteps. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah, I said. Do you think she knew you? The real version of you. Not the husband version, not the compromise version. You. I walked with that for a moment. I think she knew who I was, I said. I think she looked at it and decided it wasn't enough. Celeste was quiet. Then, that's not a reflection of what you are. That's a reflection of what she was looking for. I glanced at her. She was looking straight ahead, hands still in her pockets, speaking the way she said everything, not to comfort me, but because it was true and truth was the only language she found useful. We reached the corner where we went separate directions. She stopped. She looked at me directly the way she always did, no angle to it, no performance. Thank you for dinner, she said, even though I only had the noodles and the tea. You're welcome, I said, even though I ordered it for 6. She almost smiled. Just the edge of it, the corner of her mouth, doing something brief and genuine. Then she turned and walked toward her car. I watched her go for a moment. Then I walked to mine. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute before starting the engine. My hands rested on the wheel. The street was quiet. The night was clear. I thought about what she had said. Not a reflection of what you are. A reflection of what she was looking for. I drove home, and I sat at my kitchen table with the chest set on the shelf above me, and my grandfather's voice somewhere in the back of my mind saying something about mules and loads and distance. And I knew with a certainty I hadn't felt in a very long time that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Thursday evening after a platform review that had run long and left us both at the co-working space past 9, I asked her. We were putting our things away, the room almost empty, the overhead lights already at their low evening setting. She was zipping her laptop bag when I said, Celeste. She looked up. I want to take you to dinner, I said. Not a working dinner. Not a debrief. Dinner as in I would like to spend an evening with you as something other than a colleague. She held my eyes. The zipper of her bag was in her hand. She didn't say anything for a moment, and I didn't feel it because I had learned that she thought before she spoke, and the silence was part of the answer. Then she said, You took long enough. I wanted to make sure I was doing it right. Is that slow or thoughtful? Probably both, I said. Something moved in her face, warm and exact, the most genuine expression I had ever seen from her, which was saying something because she didn't manufacture any of them. Saturday, she said, picking up her bag. 7 o'clock. You choose where. I spend all day making decisions. I'm not making that one too. She walked out. I stood in the empty co-working space in the low evening light, and I didn't move for a moment. Not because I was stunned, because I wanted to stay in the exact feeling of that moment for just a second before the rest of the world came back in. Then I picked up my bag and went home. I had reservations to make. The first person who told Vanessa something was moving in the world was Brianna Cole. Brianna had been Vanessa's closest friend through college, a woman who worked in financial services downtown and had the particular gift of connecting information across rooms before most people knew the rooms were related. She was sharp and well-connected, and she had been watching the business coverage of Anderson Bridge Technologies come across her desk with increasing frequency for about 6 weeks before she said something. I know all of this because of Amani. Amani Reeves was Damon's younger sister, 30 years old, a graphic designer who had been in my corner long enough to remember when Damon and I were still mapping out the platform on restaurant napkins. She had the honest loyalty of someone who chose her people deliberately and then simply didn't waver. She had also never liked Vanessa, not from the first dinner. And she had the particular restraint of a woman who keeps that opinion clean and stored properly rather than spreading it around uselessly. Imani called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the parking deck after a client meeting. I ran into Brianne Nicole at the Morrison Group mixer last night, she said. I unlocked my car. How is she? Nervous, Imani said. Which is interesting because Brianne Nicole is not a nervous woman. A pause, the kind that means she's deciding how to place the next piece. She asked about you. Specifically, about you and Anderson Bridge. Said she'd seen the name in 3 separate conversations across 2 industries in the past month and wanted to know if it was the same Mason Anderson she knew from when he was married to Vanessa. I sat down in the driver's seat. What did you tell her? I told her the world wasn't that big. I looked at the windshield. The parking deck light above me was making a low buzzing sound. She asked, Imani continued, carefully, whether Vanessa knew what you'd been building. What did you say? I said. Imani said, and I could hear the precise smile in her voice, that I imagined she'd find out the same way everyone else does. When it's unavoidable. I sat with that. She went quiet after that, Imani said. The kind of quiet that means someone is doing math they don't like the answer to. Thank you, Imani. Don't thank me. Just keep building. I drove home that evening thinking about the nature of information. How it travels. How it finds its way to the people who least want to receive it before it reaches everyone else. Like it has its own sense of timing and a particular preference for irony. I thought about Vanessa at whatever dinner table she was sitting at tonight, in the life she had moved into, with the man whose trajectory matched her own. I wondered if she ever thought about me. Not with grief, not with romantic feeling, just as a practical matter. Wondered if she ever checked. I pulled into my building's parking lot and sat for a moment before going inside. Then I went upstairs, made dinner for 2 because Celeste was coming over, and set the table with a care I had almost forgotten I was capable of. She arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine she had clearly chosen thoughtfully and a look on her face that said she'd had a long day and didn't intend to talk about it over dinner. I poured the wine. I put the food on the table. We sat across from each other in the warm light of my kitchen, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with Anderson Bridge or Vanessa or any of the weight the day had carried. We talked about the documentary she had watched the night before, about the chess move I'd been thinking about for a week, about what her grandmother used to put in her sweet potato pie and how she had never fully gotten the recipe right since. After dinner, she sat on my couch with her legs folded under her and read a book while I finished responding to a client email at the desk across the room. The apartment was quiet in the way apartments go quiet when 2 people are comfortable enough in a space to stop filling it with sound. I finished the email. I looked up. She was already asleep, book on her chest, the soft overhead lamp making a warm circle around her. I got up. I took the book carefully from her hands and set it on the coffee table face down at her page. I got a blanket from the closet. I laid it over her and turned the lamp down lower, and I stood there for a moment in the near dark, looking at this woman who had arrived in my life with a travel mug and an honest eye and had stayed because she chose to and not for any other reason. My grandfather used to say, "Boy, God don't wrap his best gifts in bright paper." I was 34 years old, and I was only now beginning to fully understand what he meant. I went to bed. I slept clean and full, the kind of sleep that belongs to a man whose conscience and his actions are in agreement. A regional business publication ran a profile on Anderson Bridge Technologies on a Wednesday morning. It was clean and specific, the kind of journalism that does the actual work rather than chasing the headline. They had spent 2 weeks talking to our clients, running our numbers, examining the platform. The piece led with Theodore Banks in Charlotte, the shipping operation owner who had been fighting for competitive ground for 11 years before our platform changed his infrastructure in 90 days. Theodore was direct and generous in the way he talked about what it had done for his business, and that specificity gave the piece credibility that 100 press releases couldn't manufacture. My photograph was at the top. Imani had taken it on a Tuesday afternoon at the co-working space, natural light from the window, no staging. I looked like a man who was working and didn't know he was being watched, which was exactly what I was. The morning after it ran, Celeste came to the co-working space and sat down across from me and looked at me with that level, direct gaze. "The photograph was right," she said. I looked up from my laptop. "What does that mean?" "It means you look like someone who has stopped explaining himself to people who weren't listening." She opened her own laptop. "It suited you. I thought you should know." I held that for a moment. "That's specific," I said. "I'm a specific person." At lunch we sat at the small table in the shared kitchen, and she asked me something she hadn't asked before. "How does it feel?" she said. "The coverage, the attention, the growth arriving the way it's arriving." I set my fork down and thought about it honestly, the way she always made me think about things. "Strange," I said. "Like a coat that fits you perfectly, but you keep checking the mirror because some part of you still can't believe it's yours." She nodded slowly. "That part makes sense," she said. "You spent 7 years letting someone calibrate your sense of what you were worth. That doesn't come out of your system in a few months. You have to let yourself catch up to what you've already built." I looked across the table at her. She was eating her lunch with the same focused attention she gave everything, not looking back at me, just talking the way she always talked. Like truth was the simplest thing in the world, and she couldn't understand why people made it complicated. "There's something I want to tell you," she said, still not looking up. "And I'm going to say it the way I say everything, which is plainly, and then I'm going to pick my fork back up, and we're going to finish lunch." "Okay," I said. She set her fork down. She looked at me directly. "The first day I came to review your platform," she said, "I noticed something before I'd been in the room 20 minutes. You listened. Not the polite kind of listening that's actually waiting for your turn. You heard what I said, you held it, and then you adjusted. Without ego. Without negotiating the feedback. You just took it and improved." She picked up her fork. "I have been in this industry for 9 years. Most people cannot do that. The ones who can build things that matter. And the ones who can also listen without losing themselves," she paused. "Those are rarer than you know." She ate a bite. "I just thought you should have that information. Because I don't think anyone in your immediate recent history gave it to you. And that's a gap that needed closing." My throat did something I wasn't going to mention. "Celeste," I said. "I said we'd finish lunch," she said, not looking up. I looked at her. At the crown of her head bent over her food. At her hands on the fork. At the complete, unbothered ease of a woman who had just said something enormous and put it away with the same motion. I picked up my own fork. We finished lunch. That evening, walking out to our cars after a long session, I stopped at the edge of the parking lot. The night was cool, the street quiet, just the sound of the city at its low evening volume. "Celeste," I said. She stopped, turned, waited. "I need to ask you something," I said, and I've thought about how to say it for a while. So I'm just going to say it the way I mean it. "Okay," she said. "I would like to be more to you than a colleague," I said. "Not because I'm lonely and not because you're convenient. Because I have been in rooms with a lot of people across the past year, and you are the only one who makes the room feel honest. I don't want to waste the fact that I noticed that." She looked at me for a long, unhurried moment. The parking lot light was above us, and the city hummed at a low frequency, and she stood there in her coat with her bag on her shoulder, and she gave the question the same full attention she gave everything. Then she said, "You took long enough. I wanted to do it right." "You're slow," she said. "I'm thorough," I said. "Those are the same thing." "Not always," I said. The corner of her mouth moved. "Just barely. Just enough." "Saturday," she said. 7. "You choose the place." "And Mason." She turned toward her car. "Choose well. I am harder to impress than your navigation users." She got in her car and drove out of the lot. I stood there in the parking lot in the dark for a full minute. My hands were loose at my sides. The night was clear above me. I wasn't analyzing anything. I wasn't planning. I was just standing in the way you stand when something has happened that you know you will remember completely for the rest of your life. Then I walked to my car. I had a reservation to make, and I intended to choose well. The call came on a Monday at 9:17 in the morning. I was in the middle of a product review. Damon, 2 of our senior engineers, a conference table with laptops and coffee cups, and the efficient disorganization of a team deep in real work. My personal phone buzzed on the table beside me. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. That second ring is a signal. I stood, excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and answered. "Mr. Anderson." The voice was professional, measured, the voice of someone delivering extraordinary information in the ordinary course of her workday. "This is Catherine Moore, editorial director at Forbes." I'm calling about our upcoming World's Richest Men feature. We'd like to speak with you about your inclusion. I put my left hand flat against the hallway wall. She walked me through it calmly. The annual issue. The ranking. The analysis her team had run across 8 months of tracking Anderson Bridges' growth trajectory. The client results. The valuation. And then the number, spoken evenly, like any other number, except that it had a comma in a place I had not yet said out loud, even to Damon. We'd like you on the cover, Mr. Anderson, she said. Natural setting. Your choice of location. The editorial team feels strongly that the standard studio format doesn't serve your story. I pressed my hand harder against the wall. Mr. Anderson, are you still with me? Yes, I said. I'm here. Do you have questions? When does it hit newsstands? I said. She gave me the date. The simultaneous digital release. The reach. I thanked her. I said my team would confirm logistics within 48 hours. I hung up. I stood in the hallway for exactly 30 seconds. The building around me did its ordinary things, an elevator arriving, someone's phone ringing behind a closed door, the hum of a city in mid-morning motion. Then I went back into the conference room. Damon looked at my face. He read it in less than a second. That was 20 years of friendship doing its work. What happened, he said. I sat down. I put my phone on the table face down. I looked at him directly. Forbes, I said. The cover. World's Richest Men issue. The two engineers looked between us. Damon didn't react immediately. He picked up his water bottle. He took a long, slow drink. He set it down. He looked at the table. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back at me. She called you a waste of her time, he said quietly. She did, I said. We held each other's eyes for a moment. There was nothing theatrical in it. Just two men who had bet everything on something that had just been confirmed by one of the most recognized publications in the world. I need a minute, Damon said. Take two, I said. He stood up, walked to the window, stood with his back to the room for a moment. His shoulders moved once. When he turned back around, his eyes were steady, but doing something at the edges. He sat back down. He extended his hand across the table. I shook it. His grip was the firmest I'd ever felt from him. All right, he said to the engineers. Take a break. We're going to need an hour. They filed out. Damon and I sat in the conference room alone with 2 cold coffees and the morning light coming through the windows and the city below us going about its business without any idea what had just happened in that room. Your Uncle Lucas, Damon said. Yeah, I said. He would have liked this. He's going to get a very long phone call tonight, I said. Damon almost smiled. It was a full smile, actually, which for Damon was the equivalent of anyone else bursting into tears. That evening I drove to Celeste's apartment. She opened the door, looked at my face, and stepped back without asking. Sit down, she said. I sat at her kitchen table. She moved to the stove, put water on, pulled down the loose-leaf tea she kept in the cabinet on the left. Her kitchen was warm and full of books and smelled like whatever she had made for dinner, something with garlic and something with lemon, and the overhead light was the good amber kind that made everything look like it was where it belonged. She set a cup in front of me and sat across with her own. I told her. All of it. The call, the voice on the other end, the number, the cover. She listened the way she always listened. Complete, full, without commentary until the sentence was finished. When I was done, she wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at me. You built this, she said. Not when people were paying attention. Not when it was comfortable. You built it in the margins of a life that was pulling in every other direction. That is not luck, and it is not timing. She looked at me steadily. That is you. And I need you to let yourself know that. Not perform it. Know it. My throat did the thing again. The cover is the proof, she said. The building was the story. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She turned her hand palm up and held mine. We sat in her kitchen in the amber light with the tea going cool between us, and I thought about my grandfather's shoe-shining Sunday mornings and his voice saying the mule that's too busy complaining about the load never notices how far it's carried it. I thought about 22 months of midnight code and Damon's yellow legal pad. I thought about my Uncle Lucas's shipping yard and the problem that had started all of this. I thought about every Saturday morning I had given to something Vanessa had never once asked me about. And I thought about how none of it had been wasted. Not a single hour of it. Vanessa was in the lobby of the Westfield Grand Hotel in downtown Atlanta on a Saturday morning at 8:53. She had come in for the annual Carter Brooks Brand Strategy Summit, the conference that had become the centerpiece of her professional year. She was dressed precisely, heels clean, coat pressed, the specific presentation of a woman who understood that arrivals are performances and performed hers without error. She stopped at the newsstand by the hotel gift shop. It was a habit from her branding days, always checking what was being published, what faces were getting space, whose story was being told in which rooms. She scanned the rack the way professionals scan things, fast and practiced. And then she stopped. Forbes, the world's richest men issue. And on the cover, in clean, direct light, nothing staged, nothing manufactured, just a man looking straight into the camera with the unhurried expression of someone who had stopped needing anyone's approval, was Mason Anderson. His name in print, the number beside it, the small headline below, the quiet builder. How Mason Anderson changed an industry nobody was watching. The woman standing beside her at the rack, a conference attendee from Houston named Deborah Williams, told the story afterward to two different people, and it made its way to Brianne Nicole, who called Imani, who called me, and I am giving you the account as close to exact as it was given to me. Deborah said Vanessa went the color of dry concrete, that it happened fast, the blood just leaving her face in one movement, that her right hand came out and grabbed the edge of the rack, that her bag dropped off her shoulder and hit the floor and she didn't look down at it, that Deborah said, "Excuse me, are you all right?" and got no response, and said it again, louder, and Vanessa's eyes were fixed on the cover and her mouth was moving but no sound was coming. Then her legs went. Slowly, not dramatically. The way a building comes down when the foundation goes, settling rather than falling, but settling all the way. A hotel staff member caught her before she hit the floor. They brought a chair. They brought water. They called for the hotel's first aid attendant. She sat in that chair in the gift shop lobby of the Westfield Grand Hotel in Atlanta with a Forbes magazine in her lap and the face of her former husband looking back at her from the cover, and she did not attend her summit. Imani's voice message came through at 9:31 in the morning. I was at my kitchen table with my coffee, the east-facing window, sending its Saturday morning light across the table in that long, warm stripe I had come to love. I played the message once. Then I set the phone down. I sat with it, not with the satisfaction of a man who had planned for this. I want to be honest about that. Not with cruelty, not with performance. With something much quieter. The particular weight of a story that has completed its own sentence. I thought about the hallway, my hand on the front door handle, her voice coming from the kitchen, warm and unbothered, calling me a waste of time to her friend on the phone. I thought about the home office at midnight, the Series A conference room, Damon's yellow legal pad with the number that had since changed twice, Theodore Banks in Charlotte, the 17 clients who came after him. I thought about Celeste's casserole dish on my doorstep, about the parking lot, and the way she said you took long enough, about her hand turning palm up in her kitchen while the tea went cold, about everything built while no one was watching. I picked up my phone and called Celeste. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm from sleep, Saturday morning slow. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I said. "Something happened. Tell me." "Vanessa," I said. "She saw the Forbes cover this morning. At a hotel in Atlanta. She fainted, Celeste. She saw it and she fainted." Silence on the other end. Long enough that I could hear her processing it. That specific quality of Celeste's silence that meant she was doing something with what she'd just heard. Then she said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be neutral, "Did she make it to her conference?" I felt it start somewhere in my chest and move up fast, unstoppable, the full kind of laugh, the kind that has been stored at low pressure for a long time and finds an exit all at once. It came out of me completely, loud and real and helpless. I laughed until my eyes were running, and I had to put the phone down on the table for a moment. From the table, I could hear Celeste on the other end, holding out for approximately 4 seconds before her own composure gave way. And then she was laughing too, the real kind, open and full, and we were both laughing on a Saturday morning across a phone line in the warm light, the kind of laughter that belongs to people who have been through something real together and have arrived on the other side of it intact. When we finally came back to ourselves, she said, still catching her breath, "I genuinely want to know." "I have no idea," I said. "Mason," she said. "Yeah, that's poetic justice written in plain language," she said. "And I mean that in the most settled, unbothered way possible." "I know you do," I said. "Come over for breakfast," she said. "I'll make the good eggs. I'll be there in 20 minutes." I said. Vanessa called at 2:17 that afternoon. I watched her name on the screen until it stopped. She called again at 6 p.m., at 9 o'clock that night. The next morning at 8:45. On the third day, a text came through. Mason, I don't expect you to respond. I don't know if I would either. I just need you to know that I know what I walked away from. I knew it wrong. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the desk. I sat for a moment in the corner office on the fourth floor with the city below me and the Forbes cover on the wall and my Uncle Lucas's shipping yard in the photograph on the shelf. Then I opened my laptop. I went back to work. Some doors close exactly as they should. You don't need to reopen them to know what was on the other side. And you don't need to stand at them in grief. You just need to turn around and find out how much room you have now that no one is making you smaller, and see what you can fill it with. I had a great deal of room. I intended to use every inch of it. 2 years is a long time. It is also, when you look back at it from the right distance, barely a breath. That is the thing nobody tells you about rebuilding a life. It doesn't feel like construction while it's happening. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like a long email and cold coffee and a decision made in a hallway at 7 o'clock in the morning that doesn't announce itself as significant. And then one day you look up and the room around you is one you chose, entirely, with no one else's hand on the dial. That was where I was. Let me tell you what it looked like. The corner office on the fourth floor of the Anderson Bridge Technologies headquarters building was mine. Not corner in the symbolic sense, literally the corner, 2 walls of windows, morning light from the east and afternoon light from the south, and a view that made the city look like a system, which it was, and which I had always been able to see clearly. My desk was a solid darkwood piece I had found in an estate sale and had refinished myself over a weekend, which Damon had photographed and sent to Amani with the caption, "This man is at peace." It had scratches on one corner that I had decided not to sand out because they were evidence of a life having been lived on top of it before mine. On the wall behind my desk was a grid of photographs, 11 of them, different sizes, different subjects, places I had been, people who had shaped the work. One image of my Uncle Lucas's shipping yard in Memphis, shot from the loading dock at early morning with the trucks lined up and the light coming over the building at an angle that made everything look permanent. That one was in the center. Everything else was arranged around it. That picture was the reason for all of it. I wanted to see it every day. I wanted to remember what the problem had been before I had built the solution. On the wall beside the office door, framed simply in dark wood, was the Forbes cover. My assistant Priya had done it without asking, had ordered the frame and had it hung before I arrived one Monday morning, and when I saw it I had stopped in the doorway for a moment. I had not framed it myself. That distinction mattered to me more than I know how to explain. Theodore Banks had flown in from Charlotte 3 months after the feature ran. He arrived at 10 a.m. with his operations manager and a folder of notes and sat in my office for 2 hours talking about what the platform had done for his business in the 12 months since he'd signed on. Revenue up 31%. 3 new contracts won against firms that had been beating him for a decade. His operations manager was a young woman named Shanice who talked about the platform with the specific enthusiasm of someone whose daily work had been transformed, not improved, transformed, and I sat across from both of them and listened and thought about my Uncle Lucas and felt something that I will not call satisfaction because it was larger than that. Theodore Banks left that meeting having written a personal check for a second investment round. He also left having given me the names of 4 other business owners in his network who needed what we had built. All 4 signed within 60 days. Damon ran operations with the focused, steady energy of a man who had built something real and knew it and didn't need anyone to confirm it. He had an office down the hall with a view of his own, an equity stake that had changed the trajectory of his family, and the particular peace that lives in a person who bet on the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. We had lunch together every Wednesday. We almost never talked about business at lunch. That was deliberate. We talked about his mother's health, about the book I was reading, about the chess opening I was studying. We had earned the right to take the hour. Amani and I had lunch on the 3rd Thursday of every month. We had fallen into it gradually, the way good rhythms do, and now it was simply part of the shape of my weeks. She had started her own design practice 6 months ago and was building it with the particular confidence of a woman who had been preparing for something longer than she'd let on. We talked about her clients and my clients and what was good on the menu and what was not. We never talked about Vanessa. We didn't need to. That story had been told and understood and filed where it belonged, and neither of us needed to take it back out. That was what good friendship looked like when it survived something heavy. It found its own shape on the other side and just kept going. Celeste. Where do I put Celeste? We had been together for 14 months on the morning I'm telling you about. 14 months that had been, without drama or performance, the most honest relationship of my adult life. She still called out broken logic the same way she called out a broken navigation flow, directly, without softening, with the specific respect of someone who believes you are capable of receiving truth. She had started consulting for 3 of our enterprise clients, which meant I saw her at work and at home, and in 14 months I had not once felt the air between us performing anything. She was at my kitchen table on that Saturday morning, the light coming through the east window in its long, warm stripe, her coffee in front of her, and a book open that she wasn't yet reading, because she was looking out the window at the early sky with the completely settled expression of a woman who is exactly where she intends to be. I sat across from her with my own coffee, and I looked at her for a moment before she noticed. Not because I was trying to catch anything, because I had learned in the past 14 months to let myself be fully in a good moment rather than processing it from a slight distance out of the old habit of not quite trusting that it was real. She looked at me. What? She said. Nothing, I said. Good morning. She looked at me for one more second with the direct, unbothered gaze that had once made me straighten up in a co-working space because I wasn't used to someone seeing me that clearly. The light is good today, she said. It is, I said. We drank our coffee. The light came through the window and landed on the table between us. Outside, the city was waking up at its Saturday pace, slow and easy, and the morning had that particular quality that good Saturday mornings have, wide and unhurried, like time has loosened its collar. My grandfather's chess set was on the shelf across the room. The Forbes cover was on the wall of my office 4 miles away. My Uncle Lucas's number was in my phone under Uncle Ray the way it had been since I was 15 years old. I was 36 years old, and the life around me was one I had built with my own hands in the margins of something that had tried to make me believe I was less than I was. I had built it quietly, without announcement, with a man who raised one eyebrow across conference tables and a woman who left casserole dishes on doorsteps and told the truth like it was the only language worth speaking. I thought about my grandfather, about Sunday mornings and shoe polish and a voice that said the mule that's too busy complaining about the load never notices how far it's carried it. I had carried it far. I had not complained much. And I had noticed. I want to tell you one last thing before I finish. 2 months after the Forbes issue, I called my Uncle Lucas. Not about business. I just called. He answered on the second ring the way he always did, a little out of breath because Lucas was a man who moved constantly and answered the phone while doing something else. Mason, he said, you see that sky today? It is gorgeous out here. I saw it, I said. Uncle Ray. Yeah. The platform started because of your yard, I said. Because of watching what you were up against. I never said that directly. A pause. Long enough that I heard him stop moving on the other end. Boy, he said. I just needed you to know that. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had done that tight, honest thing that voices do when a man is moved and is not going to say so directly, but is not going to hide it either. Your grandfather would have said something about mules, Lucas said. He would have, I said. We both laughed. Low and real, and the distance between Memphis and my kitchen felt like nothing. Come see me, he said. Bring that woman Damon keeps mentioning. I will, I said. Soon, Mason. Not when it's convenient. Soon, I said. I promise. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table and the light from the east window had shifted now, the way morning light does as the hours move, angling differently, landing in a new place on the table, a little warmer, a little wider. Celeste came back into the kitchen with the book she'd gone to get from the shelf, found the page she wanted, and sat across from me. She looked up once, checked that I was fine, and went back to reading. I picked up my coffee. I didn't reach for anything else. I didn't need to. I let the morning be exactly what it was. I let all of it be good. If you watched until the very last word, you already know what that took. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow's story is already waiting, and it hits even deeper than this one. You've been here from the start. That matters.